Hello, thank you so much for joining me. My name is Bron, and this is the Travel With Us a While podcast where I share adventures with people who travel by land, air, sea, and beyond. And today's visitor is a journey that wasn't about ticking boxes or racing from place to place. It was about learning the rhythm of the road, watching pelicans fly in formation, chatting with strangers who somehow became friends, and discovering how deeply connected regional Australia really is. Today I'm very excited to have my friend Alison Rogers, who has just completed 2 weeks in a motorhome driving across 3 states in Australia. Without further ado, Alison, over to you.
Hello, Bron. Thank you. Yes, so this was my first experience in a motorhome. So we decided for this year's trip with the kids that we'd do something a little bit different.
Yes.
And they had requested South Australia as the state. They hadn't been to South Australia, and so that was the state that they really wanted to go to. They said, and I don't know why, but they were sick of Queensland. We have a few friends up in Queensland, so our trips tend to be up in that state. So we thought, sure, let's go to South Australia. And then we thought, well, why not do something a little bit different and experience Australia in a slightly different way? So rather than flying and hoteling it, we decided we would hire. So we flew out of Tasmania just after Christmas, and left behind the cooler weather because obviously we had snow on Christmas Day here in.
Crazy.
Yeah, so we were really looking forward to some warmer weather. And so we flew into Melbourne and spent a night in Melbourne, and picked up the motorhome the following day, and learnt all about, well, we thought, learnt all about what all of the buttons did and how we put the beds together and all of those sort of things, and headed on our merry way. Needless to say, we probably didn't really find our groove in the motorhome until probably day 4 or 5.
At least you found it.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, we needed to get into the groove in terms of, getting the bed set up at night and then getting set up ready for a day's travel and things like that. And there are some things that we would probably do differently if we do it again, and I'll touch on those.
Super.
So our first stop was to head down the Mornington Peninsula, and that was just a day trip. So we headed down there. One of my sons wanted to pick something up that he'd found on Facebook Marketplace. So it was a lovely day. It was a beautiful sunny day, and we got to see some of the very beautiful coastline that the Mornington Peninsula has. And then we started to head a little bit further inland and head to Ballarat.
Oh, right. Yes, nice place too.
Yeah, so from there on in, we were hopping and skipping from different caravan parks, both, the very more commercialised Big Four and Discovery parks, through to things that we had found on Hip Camp. So we were fairly self-sufficient. We had a solar panel. We had, 12-volt battery when we weren't connected to mains power. So we always had refrigeration and running water, and there was a shower and ensuite in the motorhome. So we could go off grid from time to time. We recharged somewhere when we came back into sort of more urban areas. So we spent 3 days in Ballarat. We did all of the touristy things. Our children were 10 and 14.
Yes.
So, they were very keen to have a go at panning for gold and all of
How
the things.
exciting. Did they find any?
We did.
Wow.
We're not going to be retiring anytime soon. So find some specks of gold. So, which we have kept. So at least we came, we saw, and we did find. It wasn't quite the nuggets that I was hoping that we would discover, but so that was really good. So the weather was very hot when we were in Ballarat, and we were very thankful that there was a swimming pool at the caravan park.
Lovely.
Yeah, so the kids obviously spent a little bit of time there. Can highly recommend the Ballarat Big Four caravan park.
Oh, that's
It's
good to know.
very well set up. The layout is very good, so easy to get in and out with your camper, your caravan, or your tent. They do have cabins available as well. And I guess the thing that this trip actually showed me was that a caravan park, when you pick the right locations, can actually be a really great alternative to a hotel when you're travelling with children in particular, because they do offer a lot of activities.
Yes.
And so not only did they have their facilities, and in this case in Ballarat there was a swimming pool, there was a games room, and they had the little scooters and go-karts and things that the kids could ride around in. They had the jumping mat and a few other playground equipment, and you could feed the chooks
Oh, what fun.
and those sort of things. So that was really good. But it also, that particular park for us while we were there was quite a quiet one, which we were very surprised about. So it meant that the adults got time to relax as well, which was nice. Your barbecue facilities were all very close by, and the staff were amazing. In fact, at the Ballarat one, probably some of the more welcoming and more helpful staff that we came across in our trip. So that was a good experience, and that kicked off our trip really well. And we were then going to, and we decided to, and I guess this is the joy of being in a motorhome, change our plans spontaneously, and we decided to head further north and head to Swan Hill.
Swan Hill, lovely. Beautiful there.
Yeah. So my husband always wanted to get into the Murray River, and so we thought, well, we'll head to Swan Hill, and that will be our first taste of the Murray River on our trip. We obviously came across the Murray a few times
Yes.
because it obviously runs through that whole area. Again, it was, I mean, the drive, the motorhome was really comfortable, and so the drive itself was a good drive. Obviously, a big stretch between Ballarat and Swan Hill, and it was lovely to stop along the way at some of the smaller towns for meal stops or the toilet, and so yeah, that was a nice way to see the countryside, and I took a lot of photos while we were travelling. So
I certainly enjoyed looking at them.
yeah, yes. So there's way more than I put on social media, and I guess for me this trip, because in normal travelling for us, fly into a major airport, head into the CBD of that city, and then maybe do a day trip or two, and so I very rarely get to see wilderness and outback and all of those sort of things. So for me, it was an eye opener, really, for me, in terms of the almost stark contrast
My
between,
word.
those urbanized, more touristy areas and us sort of going off grid and heading out, further distances, regional areas. And I think it was just a real, it was definitely an aha moment for me in terms of, wow, this is quite interesting in terms of what people find satisfying in terms of where they want to live and how they want to live.
Absolutely.
There were times sort of initially as we were driving and we're thinking, there's just nothing. We would just look out of our window and it was flat, and there was just nothing, like it was just so flat. And I mean, when I say nothing, obviously there was bush from time to time, there were cleared paddocks that were obviously being used for crops or livestock, or those sort of things. But there were definitely a lot of times where we sort of looked at each other and went, wow, this is amazing how, to us, and how we've been used to living, how isolated it appeared
Yes.
to us. But then when we dug deeper and stopped off and chatted to some people and things, realised that it actually wasn't as isolating as it first appeared. And that's not to say that there aren't some isolating areas in Australia, because obviously it's a vast country and you are going, sometimes kilometres and kilometres before you actually come across something that even resembles, an urban sort of area.
Yes.
But, somehow these people who obviously are farming, hundreds of hectares, sometimes thousands of hectares, or doing other sort of things rurally, how they still manage to connect and be able to have what they need for their own sustainable lifestyle. So that was really interesting.
What did your children think about that?
So I think initially, because we hadn't really looked into it, with much depth. I think initially there was probably a little bit of boredom that set in, but it wasn't until I then, thought, okay, this is really interesting. I mean, I am a bit of a thinker, and so the whole time that we were driving, and I'd be looking out the window, and then I'd just start going off and asking myself questions and looking for things, and then I'd go, and then I'd find something, and then I'd go, oh, kids, look out the window at blah blah, or what. And, every time I checked in with them, I said, are you having fun? Are you enjoying it? And the answer was always yes. So
that's lovely. That's terrific.
Yeah, there wasn't a time where they said, no, can we go home now? Or, can we go somewhere different? So I think they enjoyed the change as well. Like, I think, it was a bit of a switch off. I mean, they did have their devices in the vehicle. So when we did go for those big long stretches, there were times where they were able to access, their games or the internet or whatever. But they did, spend time just gazing and contemplating, and so that was really good.
And that's really important, that you take time out and don't just live in this very fast world.
That's right. And, I did say to them, that one of the things that I've discovered as an adult, and I do a bit of business coaching and mentoring of, my own employees and things like that. And the use of our imagination tends to diminish. The older we get, the busier we get, the more socialised we get. Not quite sure what it actually is, but obviously in children, our imagination is definitely alive and well. However, that has shifted with the introduction of devices into the world. And I just sort of said to them, like that sometimes it's good to just not have anything there, and that you do actually go back inside to your own head and, start to use your imagination and think about what you would do out here or how the people live out here. So, yeah, so it was good. It was good to be able to switch off and just...
Very wise. My best thing in life is seeing the world through the eyes of children, because it reinforces how fantastic it is, and places are amazing that you would otherwise miss unless you stopped and took the time. So
Yeah.
wise words, Alison.
That's right. Yes. So the Swan River obviously was when we got. The Swan Hill area was when we got onto the Murray River. We did actually take one of the paddle steamers that's available there from the Pioneer Village, I think it was called. So we took the paddle steamer up the river, and that went under the bridge that crossed into New South Wales.
Exciting for the kids especially.
Yeah, they did actually particularly love when we got to state boundaries. So we did the obligatory photo under the sign saying, you are now in, New South Wales, you are now in South Australia. So that was something that they found fascinating, which was great. So, and they would actually follow that on their GPS and say, we're going to be crossing the border in, blah, blah minutes or such or whatever. So
I love it.
Yeah, they particularly liked the border crossing, so that was good. And of course, you don't get that when you're in a plane.
No, not at all.
And unbeknownst to you, you're completely oblivious to the fact that you might be crossing a boundary. So yeah, they particularly liked that, and they also did pick up on the differences between each state in terms of how they dealt with the border, and different signages. And unfortunately, we were travelling at a terrible time for Victoria, because obviously they did have those devastating bushfires.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting to hear on the radio or what was happening in the town as they were preparing. So we saw a lot of the volunteer fire brigades, the doors were wide open, the truck was ready, the volunteers were in their uniforms ready, all of those sort of things. So that was good in as far as they could see how different towns handled disaster or challenges as well. So that was quite an interesting thing. Obviously, it was sad.
For sure.
But there was still some learning to come from that as well.
And I think the learning of community coming together to support each other is just top. Beautiful. I like it.
Yeah. The other thing that became a little bit of a theme as we travelled around was searching for the big whatever. So we've done the touristy thing where you go to the big banana or the big mango or whatever, but then we found some other things that we actually hadn't heard of before, like the big river cod, I think it was called.
Yes.
Murray River
Murray
cod.
cod, yeah.
Yeah, we found the big Murray River cod. We found a big gulfer. We found, a few, the big crayfish
Yes.
or lobster. So, yeah, so we found a few of those big things, which the kids also found quite interesting. And so that was really good as well. I think that, as I said, about finding our groove. So by the time we had left Swan Hill and started to head to South Australia, we'd sort of worked out, how to connect everything up quickly and efficiently, how to pack the bed down, because during the day, obviously, the kids would sit in the seats with their seatbelts on, with the table constructed in the motorhome,
Yeah.
and we would then need to pull the table up and construct a bed and fold the cushions a different way and stuff like that. And it was a little bit of an arduous task for them to start with, but by day 4, it was becoming, oh yeah, that's right, we just do this, this, and this, and it was, becoming a little bit more of a habitual pack down and setup. So that was really good. And that was when we realised that we would probably handle it a different way next time, and that is that we would spend a few more days at each location.
Yes.
So we approached this trip with trying to cover as much as we could in the 2 weeks. Obviously, we're going quite large distances. So I think in the end, we covered about 2,800 kilometres in total. But, we sort of had, when I booked, because obviously you need to book in advance in that summer period because it's peak tourism time. And so if I had not have booked anything, we may not have been able to find somewhere to sleep. And obviously in most places, just pulling up on the side of the road in your motorhome is technically not legal.
Yes.
So you need to be on either private property or in some sort of commercial, caravan or purpose type park.
Yeah.
And so it was like, okay, I better book some things. And so it was like, okay, well, where do we want to go? And so what we did to start with as a family was we sat down and we got a map out of those 3 areas that we were going to, and started doing a bit of Googling and stuff and saying, okay, well, what is it that we particularly want to do when we're on the trip? And so there were a couple of things that the kids particularly wanted to do. And I said, oh, well, I'd love to, if we're going to South Australia, it's been a long time since I've done some of the wine regions in South Australia, so I'd love to go to a couple of wineries. Patrick obviously had said that he wanted to see the Murray River and get in the Murray River. I said that I wanted to go to some caves. The kids, they more focused on more commercialised things like finding the world's largest lolly shop, and things which we did end up finding. They wanted to go to the beach house at Glenelg, which is a theme, like an amusement sort of park area and water slide area. So they were, those were the sort of things that they put on the list. But then as we explored more, it was like, oh, okay, the little blue lake, the pink lake, this cave or this, or whatever. So then we had that list, and then from that list, I was able to say, okay, well, that means we're going to go from there to there, and then we're going to go from there to there, and then we're going to go from there to there. And we tried to keep our travel, our actual driving time, down to sort of 2 or 3 hours per day.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. So we broke it up and didn't spend all of our time on the road, and we spent more of our time exploring.
Excellent.
And so I just then got online and found those caravan parks along the way that would then service that ability for us to only travel a maximum of 3 hours or so a day. But that meant that because we were heading from Victoria to South Australia, that it did mean that we couldn't stay for 5 days in a particular place because we only had, our 14 days in total, and we needed to get to the other places. So it meant that, our bookings were sort of, 2 days at a time. We did Ballarat for 3 days because it was over New Year's Eve. So we thought, well, we'll just have a little bit more of a relaxing time and take it easy on New Year's Day. So that was the one thing where we said next time we probably wouldn't travel as far.
Yes.
But we would stay for longer in one particular place and do more exploring from that base, where we could actually just leave the motorhome and go off exploring rather than having to pack up and set up and dismantle each time. So, yeah, and then that made us wonder whether it was better to actually tow a caravan rather than an actual motorhome, because obviously with the motorhome you are restricted about where you can park.
Yes.
And obviously you have a certain height restriction as well, so there were some places where you couldn't necessarily drive. And so we thought, well, maybe it would actually be really good to be towing a van that we could then leave at the caravan park, and then we hop off in the vehicle and have a little bit more flexibility. So there were some things that we sort of discovered along the way that might suit us a little bit better. So anyway, the drive from Swan Hill through to the Coorong, that was our longest drive, and that was when we saw a lot of very flat, dry, empty paddocks with houses only every now and then. But there were still things that we could stop off and see. So, for example, when we hit South Australia and we started to see the salt lakes,
Yes.
which none of us had ever seen before. So it was quite fascinating when we first crossed them. So they were sort of, my first sort of real, click, 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 click on the camera, because there was just so many different aspects to it, and looking at the different trees and what was growing there now and what had grown and what we could see is going to grow again when the water comes back, and those sort of things. So that was really fascinating. The other things that we really liked watching was the railway. So most of the time there was a railway not that far from whatever highway we were on.
Right.
And of course, because of the expanse of those areas and that they are for farming, then you would have close by and nearby to the rail the silos.
Oh, yes.
So most of which that we came across were grain silos. But yeah, so that was very interesting. And that then started another little theme, and that was taking photographs of the silos that had murals painted on them.
Aren't they amazing?
Yeah. So there's quite a few of them along those stretches of highways, and some of them were just brilliant. And some of them told a story of the town that they were in. Other ones were just purely decorative, but that was interesting. So we stopped and took photographs of those as we came across them. So yeah, that was really fascinating. It was also it was interesting to see that they bale their hay differently over there as well.
Really? Yes.
So yeah, it's just the little things. So down here in Tassie, we're used to the smaller rectangular bales or the big round bales that they wrap. The ones that we were seeing a lot of were much bigger rectangular bales,
Wow.
and so obviously their farming equipment. And I guess this is just the nature of the fact that they're doing, hundreds and thousands of hectares instead of, tens or hundreds. And so everything was much larger in scale. So their machinery was obviously much bigger. They could pump out the bales a lot bigger. They also stacked them differently. And so, I took photographs of just hay bales in paddocks, fascinating as well.
You're not alone. I do that too.
And then also just the way that they stored their grain. So they would then put the grain piles on the ground and wrap those, obviously to keep the weather off them and keep rodents out, I guess. And then they would just, as needed, would then, open it up. So that was really good to see as well. Just to see another way of doing things in rural areas. So that was good. Loved calling into all of the old pubs and shops along the way as well, and just the architecture. Like there was a lot of history, and lots of buildings built in the 80s.
Amazing.
And being in real estate myself, obviously buildings do fascinate me. And so I took a lot of photos of old pubs, old shops, old churches. Yeah, and sometimes it'd just be in the middle of nowhere. There'd be this grand building, and some of them weren't looked after, and some of them were looked after very well. So that was just a really interesting thing to sort of come across as well. The wild melons.
Yes, all on the side of the road.
Yeah. So that was really fascinating as well, because we're travelling around and all of a sudden there's these paddocks and they've got these yellow, orangey or green sort of bright
All.
cast against the very dry paddock. And I'm thinking, what is this? And it'd be kilometres of them, and there'd be hundreds of them. And so luckily where we were, we had internet. So
Yes.
I was Google, and that was lucky because We then discovered that we're not going to pull off and grab one and try one because they can be toxic to humans and they are very bitter to taste. So they're also not good for livestock either. So I'm assuming that there is something in nature that eats those, but they were certainly in some areas. There was a place called Union where that was particularly where we sort of came across them to start with. And then that then discovered, like, okay, well, what would you do with them? Like, there's a lot of these, I wonder if, we could use these somehow, maybe they could be distilled and turned into some sort of alcoholic drink, or, maybe they could be fermented, or, whatever. So we were just sort of thinking about, well, what are these? What uses them? And what has nature given these to us for? So that was, that was interesting. That one also, when I popped the photo up, got a lot of comments as well. People are going, what is this? So there's obviously a lot of other people that haven't seen these wild melons growing on the side of the road as well.
And did you see many goats?
We did. It depended on where we were. So obviously when we were in Swan Hill and we were near the Murray, there was a lot of boating that was happening there, whether it be houseboats, speedboats, rafts, those sort of things.
Yes, Alison, I think you misunderstood. I said, did you see any goats, the animals that
Goats.
on the side? Yeah.
No. So that we didn't see a lot of goats as in just driving along the highway.
Yeah.
Come across goats when we were in the Coorong at a hobby farm, and there was obviously a stud that was breeding goats at one point. I do particularly like goats, particularly the miniature goats, and I did say to Patrick, I said, "Oh, maybe we could have goats in our paddocks." Yeah, but no, I didn't actually find that there was a lot of livestock. It was more the roads that we travelled were mainly crop.
Oh, yes.
So it wasn't until we started coming back from South Australia and heading back to Victoria on a different route, closer to the coast rather than inland, that we started to see a lot more cows. But yeah, there weren't a lot of paddocks filled with livestock on our trip from Swan Hill to Adelaide. That was more crops, which was interesting as well. Yeah, it was great. There was a particular pub that I liked. On our road to, and I'm just trying to get it up, just remember the name of it. It was called the Golden Grain.
Oh, yes.
And I'm just trying to remember what town that was in. I can't remember now what it was. It was on the main street of a little town. But we stopped there for lunch one day, and I thought it was a really delightful pub. We walked in and we were getting close to the 2:00, meals shut off sort of time. So we had to check to make sure that they were still going to be serving lunch, and they were. And it was a very hot day, like it was about 42 or 43 degrees. There was a woman at the bar who served us, and then we sat down, and I'd been looking at the pictures and stuff, and it became very apparent to me that it was a woman who was running that pub. And I said to my husband, I said, I bet a woman is the licensee here. And he said, what makes you say that? And I said, oh, just the special touches. And I went into the toilets, and there were quotes on the mirrors, things like, you've got this, girl, and
Excellent.
you were beautiful, and keep smiling, gorgeous. And there were the pictures that were on the walls. There was a lot of messages, empowering messages for women. And
how nice.
There were pink things, and there were pretty things, and you could just see that it had been curated well, and it was good to see that out in the middle of what we sort of described as nowhere, because we'd gone 100 and 200 kilometres seeing virtually nothing, and then coming across this pub. And it was just really nice to see that there was being a woman myself, and being a woman in business, and obviously having been involved in mentoring women in business, it was just really nice to see a woman running an establishment, and she had put her feminine touch on it, and I thought for me that worked really well. So yeah.
Lovely.
I'm just trying to think what else you might want to sort of know about, but I guess, apart from the fact that there was a lot of learnings along the way from nature, and civilization and the way towns were set up and things like that that you wouldn't normally see if you're going to be in the air flying from place to place.
So true. So true. Yeah.
That it was just the lessons around how to be more efficient and effective in a motorhome or camping. And we pulled up at one and we did something, and then after we'd set it up, we were like, oh, that wasn't very smart, was it? We should have perhaps backed in and put the awning on the other side, or something like that. And in a couple of places, the hose didn't reach the tap.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, and of course, when you're just hiring a commercial motorhome, they only provide you with the bare essentials. And so it was like, oh, we're going to have to head down to Bunnings to go and get a hose extender, because otherwise we're not going to have water coming into the van. And so one of the gentlemen that overheard us, and he said, oh, can I help? Oh, I've got an extension. Would you like to borrow mine? And so that was then, really nice that the one thing that you probably don't get in a hotel is the friendliness, the willingness to support, the willingness to help, the willingness to lend, share,
Absolutely. We've
and
discovered that very much so.
sit down and have a barbecue with people that you've never met before. And so that was something that we were really glad that the kids saw, because they made a lot of friends along the way, because there were kids.
Fantastic. I was wondering if they did feel that as children, because you do meet the most amazing people on the road. It's lovely.
Yes. Yes. And the stories that you hear from people were quite amazing. And so we got to know some people, and, they were from all areas. So there were some Maori people from New Zealand that we got
Lovely.
to know, and there were quite a few European travellers that we noticed as well. And so, having a chat about what's happening in Switzerland or in Denmark or wherever they were from, that was really interesting as well. And even we did actually get into a taxi when we were in Adelaide. So we actually chose a caravan park not very far out of the CBD of Adelaide when we got to Adelaide.
Yep.
Sort of thought, well, from there we can travel in various directions, whether it be by bus, cab or train. And so that was called the Brown Hill Creek Caravan Park.
Yes.
And it was just delightful. It was like this little nature oasis in the middle of suburbia.
How lovely. How lovely.
7 kilometres from the CBD. There was a creek that ran through, and it was a reasonable sized caravan park. It was a very long one, rather than being this great big expanse that you can sort of see everything. It was quite a long park that ran along the side of the river.
Oh, nice.
It had a lovely swimming pool, so that ticked things for the kids. It also had, like they all have camp kitchens, which are always great for meeting places as well. But our site happened to be next to a permanent resident, so someone who's taken up a van space there permanently.
Lovely.
And he would have been, I would imagine, in his late 70s, possibly early 80s. And he was a lovely old chap. But it became very apparent during our stay, and we were only there for 2 nighs, that hardly anybody speaks to him.
Oh my, how sad.
Yeah, so he's probably got a fairly lonely existence there. But what he had done to fill the void was make friends with the wildlife. And so it was very warm day. I think we were in the high 30s and early 40s for those 2 days that we were there. And he had a sprinkler set up at the back where we were parked, so behind the van and behind his van. We had some ducks that came up. There was a mother duck with 8 ducklings. And we had magpies, and there were rosellas or parrots. And so they all came up because they were coming for the cool water, and they would just shower under the sprinkler. And he had little bowls set up where he was giving them seed and apple.
Oh, goodness, how lovely.
So they'd obviously become resident wildlife because he trained them to come up for their water and their food. And we just sat there and watched the wildlife, and it was quite beautiful. But at the end of our trip, we knew we were heading back to Victoria to then get on a flight to head back to Tassie. So we didn't have many more days left. And I did have a bottle of wine. It was very warm, and I had a bottle of Pinot Noir in the van. And I thought, you know what? I'm not going to feel like red in this heat. And so we gave him a bottle of wine as we left because we noticed that he was doing things on a budget, on a shoestring. And I said, "Oh, do you like red wine?" And he said, "Indeed, I do." And I said, "Well, we can't take this with us on the plane. It's going to be too heavy. Would you like it?" And he said, "Oh, thank you." He said, "You don't have to do that." And he said, "No, no, you looked after our van when we headed off, and we really like the fact that you're looking after the wildlife." And he said, "Oh, thank you." And he said, "Yeah," I just sort of leave people to themselves. I don't want to intrude, and so I just sort of keep to myself. And I said, "Look, it's been really lovely to chat and get to know you." He said, "Well, thank you for your conversation." He said, "It's been very enjoyable to have you next to me for these last couple of nights." So that was just really nice to know that we had brought him a little bit of happiness as
I'm
well.
glad, yes. And to demonstrate to your children that a small thing can really be a big thing in the ultimate end.
Yeah, yeah. So that was really lovely. We did get a taxi from that caravan park when we headed to Glenelg for the day, and the taxi driver that picked us up had an interesting story as well. And I think for the large part too, a lot of people get into taxis and they might talk amongst themselves, but they don't necessarily talk to the taxi driver. But we started asking him questions about Adelaide and how long he'd been here. He was obviously not originally from Australia because he had an accent and he didn't have white skin. And so, we're starting to have a bit of a chat about his journey and stuff. And anyway, it turned out that he had come to Australia a little over 20 years ago on a persecution visa.
Oh, goodness.
I think he called it a humanitarian visa. I can't remember the exact name that he called it. And so anyway, he'd mentioned that, and then we were talking a little bit more, and then we sort of said, so when you say humanitarian visa, is that like, was that for refugee status or something? And he said yes. He said for persecution, and he was a Muslim man who lived in a country that was predominantly Muslim. And again, this was something that I didn't realise, but he was in a minority Muslim group, and the majority Muslim group persecuted the minority, which I found fascinating. I didn't even know that Muslims would turn on each other. And from the age of from the age of 15, he was captured and put into jail with his father, his brother, and his uncle. And he spent 4 years in jail from the age of 15.
Wow.
He hadn't done anything wrong. They didn't, he wasn't stealing or playing up or doing something that he shouldn't have been doing. He was quite simply at the wrong place at the wrong time in the wrong sect of this particular religion, and they jailed him. And so they managed to get him out of jail, and he fled to Australia to escape that. And so he said he owes a lot to Australia because he was able to then have a family out here, and they've gone to university. And interestingly, they had all studied humanities subjects, so psychology and education and other things like that. So that was very interesting. And so yeah, so his, that 15-minute taxi journey was fascinating in itself to learn about his life, and I guess for our children to hear how lucky we are to be in Australia and how things could be very different in different countries depending on something, like your religion. So that was quite a profound conversation as well, just by hopping into a taxi.
And educational for your kids, as you say. Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Goodness.
So Glenelg was obviously a fairly commercialised area, lots of shops, and the kids wanted to go to the Beach House amusement park, which we did, and so they spent hours going up and down water slides that you won't catch me dead in.
Me neither.
And so I just sat and watched and took a couple of photos as they popped out a tube somewhere. And then we headed down because obviously the Glenelg beach is right behind there. And that is a patrolled beach, and it's a very well set up beach. And there's a massive jetty that the teenagers were all jumping off.
Oh, what fun. What fun.
Yeah, so Glenelg Beach is lovely. And, for a very urbanised area, a particularly clean beach as well. So and the water was beautiful. So that was a really lovely spot. But that was sort of from Melbourne until we got to Glenelg. They were the first two sort of areas where we were in a highly populated, commercialised sort of area. For the rest of the journey in between, it was all, quite remote, mostly regional, small, and, low population numbers. So yeah. So again, that was sort of like, oh wow, this is just that contrast again, to experience that differently. The one, we asked the kids what their favourite parts were, and my eldest, the 14-year-old, said that he particularly liked the Coorong area and the peninsula that we stayed on. We did a hip camp stay off grid there at Coorong Island Retreat, and that was a working farm. And so you just pull up and pick a spot in their paddock, and there were alpacas and sheep, and that was where we saw pelicans for the first time, and the kids hadn't really seen a pelican.
Goodness.
And the pelicans were flying in formation, which I had never seen.
Beautiful. I love pelicans.
So I got a few very distant photos of pelicans flying in formation. But even though that was off-grid and probably one of the more isolated caravan parks, the 14-year-old said that was the most scenic and the one that he liked the best.
Oh, nice.
That was interesting. So that was in a place called Meningie.
Oh, yes, I've been to Meningie.
Yeah, in the Coorong. And it was the supermoon that night.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah. So we saw a very beautiful sunset in one direction with the moon, the supermoon, coming up in the opposite direction, which was quite amazing to be out there on the peninsula. No lights. So it was just us and nature. It was a little bit windy because it was on a peninsula, but yeah, hardly anybody in sight, and just a sunset on one side and a supermoon on the other. So that was a really beautiful sight to behold.
And your other child, what did they?
So I think that the water slides were definitely a highlight for him. He spent as much time as he could in water, whether it be beach or pool. And so he particularly just enjoyed being in the water. And again, something that we don't spend enough time doing here in Tassie, simply because it tends to be a lot cooler at the beach. And, there's less days where you sort of feel like you want to go and get into a swimming pool. And then we also did the steam train ride in Victor Harbour.
Oh, wow, nice.
So we went from where was it? Strathorban, I think it was, to Victor Harbour, and that was a steam train, so a coal-fired steam train.
Yes.
And he really liked that. Now that then made me realise about something else with human nature, and that was quite interesting for me. When we got to crossings and train stations along that journey, and it was about a half an hour journey out to Victor Harbour and then a half-hour journey back. On both occasions, there were people deliberately pulled up at these crossings or stations to take photographs.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, so multiple people who were pulled up, set up with their tripod, with their high resolution camera, that sort of thing,
Wow.
photographs of the train as it came through the station or the crossing.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then the other thing that happened was just about everyone that we came across on the sides of the rail waved at us.
Lovely.
Yeah. And it took me a little while to sort of cotton on to the whole thing. And I leant over to my husband and I said, if we were in the middle of Sydney on a normal commuter train, this was happening. No one would be waving to us. No one would stop to take photographs. And so I just found that a really interesting thing in itself. I guess the romanticism of the era of the steam engine, or I'm not 100% sure exactly, because I didn't speak to these people to say, oh, why have you stopped to particularly these photographs, or why are you waving to us? In a normal scenario you wouldn't wave. And so it was just a nice experience. There was a little bit of connection.
Yes.
that what this train, this steam train, was the catalyst for. And I thought that that was quite lovely. And I thought, well, what other areas in life can we cultivate this connection? You know, what is the thing that's going to be the catalyst for that connection? Because everyone had a smile on their face and everyone was waving and enjoyed, and you know, like the people in the train would go, oh, they're waving, you know, it was all, there was excitement and
Happiness.
there was wonder, and so that was a really nice experience as well. So that was, yeah, that was an interesting part of the trip, and another realization of, you know, maybe that we are yearning for connection, and then, you know, when a commuter train whizzes by in the middle of, you know, Sydney or Brisbane or whatever, that is taking away from that connection, and that maybe it's the slower pace of the train, or is it the fact that it's making a noise and it's chugging along, or, you know, is it the fact that we were all sitting on there just to enjoy the scenery rather than just get from A to B? Anyway, it was quite an interesting thing to sort of ask questions around and sort of to think about in terms of, you know, why that was happening. But it was just lovely. It was lovely to experience that sense of connection.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Had. So, and he also particularly liked getting onto the salt lake, the pink
Yes, the pink
lake.
lake.
Obviously, as the salt dries out in this particular area, it goes pinker and pinker. And so that was quite an interesting part of the trip as well. And then also, yeah, coming across the big, you know, the big crayfish and the big Murray cod. The other thing that he particularly likes, and he's a bit of an artist, I think, inside, is we went to the McLaren Vale, is where we went. So I had been to the Barossa and the Adelaide Hills before, but I hadn't been to McLaren Vale. And that area in itself was quite fascinating as well. And for two completely separate reasons. The first vineyard that we went to was called De Arnenberg. And that has the Cube.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and so the Cube is a multi-level building that houses an art gallery and an art exhibition, as well as a tasting house, as well as a restaurant. And so the art exhibition was fascinating, and the kids found that quite fascinating as well, because it was mixed media, and it was quite an interesting and different way to experience an art gallery, and also a way to experience a winery
Too, yes.
so that was really good, and so we particularly enjoyed that. And it was Salvador Dali was
Yes.
the artist. So yeah, so that fascinating, obviously, because the art is quite different. And then the other vineyard that I went to was a little bit further along, and it was a woman-led vineyard, and that was called, I think it was called Daisy Hill.
Oh, yes.
But the young lass, it was so Australia, you get this in Tasmania, but we're out in the middle of South Australia, and I walk in, and the young lady behind the counter, she went, "Oh, hello, we've met before." And I said, "Have we?" I said, "Your face does sort of look familiar." But I said, "I'm a long way from home." And she said, "Yes, you are." She said, "You're from Tasmania."
Nice.
And I said, "How did you know?" And she said, because I'm originally from Tasmania, and that's where I remember you from. And I couldn't place her. And to start with, she couldn't either. She said, "I just know that I've known you, but it was a while ago." And we sort of worked through our possible connections. You know, I said, "Okay, well, what is your name? What's your mum and dad's name? Where did you work?" And she had worked at Frogmore Creek, which was a vineyard that I do attend on a regular basis. And there were a couple of other places that she'd worked where that, you know, we thought, well, that could be the common thread. And then she said, "No, I don't think so." She said, "But my dad did used to be the chef at the Salamanca Inn, and I did front of house and did some work in the function area there with him." And I said, "Well, I used to run Women's Network Australia at the Salamanca Inn." And she said, "That's it." She said, "I used to serve you at Women's Network Australia." And so that was 10 or 12 years ago.
12 at least. I
And
remember
she had
filming some of them.
that. She was obviously quite young at that stage, so she'd had 10 years of maturity because she was still just in her mid-20s, I think. So she must have been 15 or something like that when she met me. And so that was, I said, well, good memory. But anyway, she was a really lovely host. She did an excellent tasting, and really explained the different wines that were there, but also explained this woman-led vineyard and how excellent the winemaker was, and that she was now mentoring other people in the industry and things like that. But the fascinating thing that I found about the McLaren Vale area was that the Barossa Valley took off and became really popular, and it was really hard to get in to vineyards and indeed to own a vineyard in that Barossa Valley area. And so those who couldn't make it in the Barossa ended up going to McLaren Vale. And in a lot of cases, they were also women, because women weren't seen and respected as much in that industry back when the Barossa was getting established.
Yeah.
And so she said a lot of those went to McLaren Vale, but McLaren Vale is now becoming an area that is more popular now and coming into its own. And of course, these women in the wine industry are coming to the fore. So that was also a really fascinating and interesting conversation to have.
The people you meet along the way is what makes the travel worthwhile for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we wouldn't have had it any other way. Having to have to stop and have conversations with people, the togetherness of caravan parks,
Yes.
and meeting people at caravan parks, and I'd never done it before. I mean, the only other time that I had travelled in that sort of way was when I was much younger and I was travelling for sport. And so, I'd stayed in caravan parks when I was competing around the country, and when I went to America to compete, we stayed in dormitory sort of type style places and things, but I was with the team that I was travelling with.
Yes.
And I would only meet the other athletes that were, a part of whatever it was that we were going over there to do. So I didn't really get to meet the locals so much. And then, of course, for most of my adult life, I have been flying and hoteling it, and in urban cities. And so therefore, keeping to myself, not really having those open discussions, not really having the time to have those thought-provoking, dots in your head,
Yeah.
and certainly not getting the learnings. So it's been a really eye-opening experience. It's been quite I would describe it as health-giving, as heartwarming and grounding, I guess, were some of the things that I think I've picked up most from the trip. But just knowing that I saw far more of Australia and the beauty that we have in nature, and how important that nature is to us and our lessons and our learnings and our existence, and how important people and our connections are.
Absolutely.
So it definitely won't be the last time that we do a trip like that. And I'd like to think that the kids also thought that was a lot of fun, and that they would do it again.
Alison, thank you so much for sharing that with us. So, what I want to suggest to you is make a photo book, get the kids involved, because I know you took photos of every state line you went across. Ken and I do a photo book every 6 months while we're traveling, and it's amazing. We've been traveling for about 12, 13, 14 years, and I have a book for each 6 months, and
Yes,
we look through them and you think, oh my gosh, I forgot we did that, because you do, especially if you're like me, and it sounds like you are, you take hundreds of photos.
yes,
You need to, while it's all fresh in everybody's mind, pick up some photos. It's really easy to do a photo book, and make a photo book for them too. A photo memory book is what it's called.
yes.
Anyway, would you stay online while I just
Sure.
close up here and say thank you very much to everybody who listened, and especially to Alison for sharing those insights into camper vanning for the first time, and how lovely it is out in the outback and the new things you see and do. And if you have enjoyed this conversation and would like to watch more, please hit the subscribe button. In the meantime, travel safe and enjoy.